Welcome to the Midnight Report. We're going to be discussing if there was an intruder that killed JonBenét Ramsey, how is it likely done, and everything surrounding the intruder theory specifically. I'll talk about the pros, the cons. For most people that have watched my last couple of videos, my documentary, and you will have seen what my opinion is on the case overall, but I want to go through the intruder theory and talk about why it's a major theory and why some people believe it, why some people don't believe it, and kind of just going through it. I wanted to kind of break down into segments of my documentary because it is a almost 2-hour long project. I didn't have a ton of time to focus on individual aspects of this case. And so as we go into the JonBenét Ramsey case, I want to dedicate this video to going through one of the major theories. I want to do this with all of the major theories, like the Burke did it, the Patsy did it, the John did it, and starting with the intruder theory because it's just different from the other three, where the other three are all Ramsey related. This one is specifically related to an intruder. And so I want to start with a bit of background information and kind of going into this case. So if there was an intruder, the really important point to try and solve right away is, was it somebody that was a stranger that the Ramseys did not know personally? Or was it somebody that they might have known, maybe they were at least acquaintance with, they knew of that person? What was it? Because that's something really important to understand in this case. That regardless of who did it, they seem to have a lot of knowledge about the Ramseys. Now, if it was a stranger, that's not to discount the fact that that could have been a person that was stalking the family, could have known them because of maybe JonBenét's pageants. It could have been somebody that was following the family that knew enough about them. And why is that important to this case? So there's a number of things that that somebody would have to know specifically to be like an intruder and to do this. For one, the house was a maze. People that even knew the family, that were friends, they felt like they couldn't find their way and would get lost in the house. The house was huge, multi-leveled. It was a very rich home. And so it'd be very difficult for somebody that's never been in the home at all to have pulled this crime, especially making not a lot of noise at all, no trace of you being there really outside of, well, JonBenét, of course, and the ransom note, but no actual relevant evidence, like where they broke in, any of that stuff. They would have had to, at the very least, have known how the house functioned before the night that JonBenét Ramsey was murdered. The next thing would be John's bonus. Now, this one is kind of contested because the problem with John Ramsey's bonus is that John Ramsey, when asked on one of the interviews, one of the past videos I did on, was there a payment stub or anything that would have told an intruder what your bonus was, and he said he didn't actually know. He didn't know. So the problem becomes, is that something that an insider would have had to have known? Like, if it is somebody that was, say, at his work, specifically in John Ramsey, did that person know those things? So that is another thing that's really weird, because if it was lying around in the home and an intruder could have seen it, that would be a perfect solution to this. But John doesn't clarify if that was the case or if it was not the case. Also, the placement of the note is something I talked about a lot in my documentary, because given what we know about the parents and all the people, they had specific routes in which they came down the stairs. And if I'm an intruder and I'm thinking logically, I'm thinking, well, the back staircase is not a staircase that's going to be used by the parents, really, because they're much closer to the front staircase. Burke as well. So you would assume to put the ransom note in the main staircase where it would be found more easily. Whereas, like, if it's found on the back staircase, somebody might not actually have gone on the back staircase. So that's another point of this that's really important. The people, whoever did this, knew enough about the parents, knew enough about the family, so that certain things went the way that they did. So I do want to pull up some statistics, though, about the idea of a murdered child and also about the sexual assault that was being done in this case. So according to the U.S. Department of Justice and FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, 85 to 90% of murdered children are killed by someone they know, and this can be a parent, family member, family friend, or neighbor, and only 10 to 15% are killed by total strangers. So this would indicate that likely, if we're going off of probabilities, it's somebody that knew JonBenét Ramsey to some degree. It wasn't out of the blue and that nobody knew them. Now, you can also put a counterpoint, because JonBenét Ramsey is a slightly different case, because JonBenét was somebody that was competing in beauty pageants. She was exposed to a lot more individuals, and I am somebody that really thinks child beauty pageants are disgusting. It opens that door that somebody could have been in there. So the likelihood, I think, is a little different because of the scenario, but I still will point to the idea that given the statistics, it's somebody that was probably known by the family or they knew of the family. But if we continue going on, for children under the age of 12, the percentage rises even higher, often cited as over 90%. In child sexual assault cases, the offender is almost never a stranger. That's the key point here. And so I want to just point that out right away. Is the murder is already highly leans towards somebody that is closer to the family. But even in the sexual assault, that also seems to never be a stranger either. It seems somebody that the family would know. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, roughly 93% of child sexual abuse victims know their abuser. Of that 93%, 34% are family members, 59% are acquaintances like a neighbor, a teacher, coach, babysitter, family friend, and 7% involve strangers. So that to me is really important because in two different statistics with two different things going on, whether that's with abuse or whether that's through murder, both heavily lean against it being a stranger. And so I'm going to operate off of that now. I will bring up some things that could lead to it being a stranger, but I do think if this was an intruder, if we're working off of that idea, and again, this is not necessarily what I believe, and we're going to talk about some of the counters as we get towards the end of the video, but if you are leaning in the camp of it was an intruder, the statistics heavily indicated it is somebody that was known by the family. So let's then go to if it had been somebody that didn't necessarily know them the best, or even if it was somebody that knew them, it is interesting and relevant to understand that on December 23rd, 1996, only a few days before JonBenét's passing, there was a holiday open house / party, and this had about 30 guests, friends, neighbors, business associates. Now, doesn't necessarily mean people that are close to the Ramseys, but people that are their acquaintance with. And so this would have been the perfect opportunity if you were somebody that was going to try and kidnap JonBenét, or you wanted her for sexual reasons, or you wanted to murder her, whatever you wanted to do. This is the perfect time to try and figure out how this house is mapped out. Because 30 people there, you can get lost. It's a big house. You have an innocent explanation. Say you went to the bathroom and nobody's seen you for a while. You can just say you got lost, more or less. This would be the perfect scenario in which somebody could begin the plans of trying to do the crime. But there is another thing that's a little weird about this holiday open party / house. I am a little, mad at myself because I'd never included this in my documentary, and I do think it's very relevant. But there also was a little bit of an incident. Someone placed a small cross made of garland on JonBenét's bedroom door later that evening. At the time, the Ramseys, they didn't take anything from that. Of course, that's just something that you're going to be like, oh, maybe a child put it there or whatever. But at the same time, could this have been an omen of what was to come? Who knows? So let's then go into what I believe is the most likely outcome, given everything we've kind of built up to. It was somebody that knew the family well. There was opportunity to try and case the whole house. And it seems with all the statistics, it points to somebody they knew. So I want to point out, I believe this is the most likely outcome if the intruder case is the right one. I don't believe, for me personally, that this is the case. But if it was an intruder, this is the most realistic way I could see things going down. I believe that someone could have broke into the house through lock picking a door or a window being left open, or maybe even a door was left unlocked. We do know that by the morning, John Ramsey and also the police officer at the time said all of the doors were locked. But we don't know, like during the day, maybe a door could have been left unlocked by the children or whatever. And so that then lets somebody come in. I think this makes the most sense from the intruder theory side of things, that they were in there before the Ramseys came back because of just the way that the ransom note was done, the preparation that I assume this person would have had to do. They were getting, all the supplies, all that kind of stuff. I then believe that the person began writing the note while the Ramseys were gone, or after they all went to sleep. And the reason that I think it's kind of contested is, if you're an intruder, would you really risk trying to take the Ramseys notepad and their own stuff and writing this note in the meantime while you wait. That's the thing that I just don't understand. That's the thing I just don't know, because if you're at home and then you're like, oh, well, where's my notepad? I don't think you would think, oh, there's somebody in the house or whatever, but it is kind of you're keeping them a little bit more alert than you would maybe necessarily want to. So I do lean towards a possibility that the ransom note, if it was an intruder, was done while they were sleeping, just based upon the fact that it would be a little bit less suspicious if the Ramseys were to stumble upon their notepad and certain things just being missing. So once the note was finished and everyone was asleep in the later hours of the night, this person would then go to JonBenét's room. Now, the biggest issue you have here is, how did the person, if they were an intruder, get JonBenét out of their bed downstairs without any sound really being heard? Now, there was a scream heard around midnight, but this has never been backed up by anyone else. No one in the home heard this scream. I honestly think that this source was not very reliable, because there's nothing else that confirms that. Because if somebody was yelling and you heard it and you were outside of the home, how did nobody inside the home hear it? That just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. If the Ramseys had acknowledged this, maybe it'd be a little bit more interesting, but they didn't. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So the question is, how did they lure this person to the basement? If it was somebody that JonBenét knew, if it was somebody that she was familiar with, that could make sense. A child not necessarily understanding, oh yeah, a person being in your house in the late hours is a really bad thing. Maybe this person was able to lure them down to the basement or something along those lines, and then unfortunately sexually assaulted her. And then maybe it got rough and she banged her head into something, or maybe the intruder hit her over the head with something at this point. You could also go with the idea that JonBenét was knocked out in her bed, so the person hit her with something to knock her out, because yes, she is sleeping, but you have to carry her down multiple flights of stairs, all that kind of stuff. Maybe the person knocked her out. That is the initial damage on her head, which would have basically made her brain dead. The person at this point didn't know that necessarily, then went to the basement, did the horrible things, and then maybe upon realizing that she actually is dead and they actually had intended on kidnapping her, they got the garrote and killed her. Now, I don't know why they would then make the garrote then and then kill her. Why wouldn't you just, hit her on the head again? You've already done it once. You've shown you're a terrible piece of shit. So I don't understand that part of it. There also is the idea that Lou Schmidt also brought the idea that maybe there was a stun gun involved, because there seemed to be two markings that Lou Schmidt pointed to possibly being this stun gun. I've also seen conflicting reports that that's not exactly accurate, that this doesn't necessarily look like a stun gun. So highly contested, highly controversial, like everything in this case. We don't know. But just imagine, for the intruder theory, at some point, somehow she gets to the basement. Nobody hears. It's done without really a peep. Nobody notices. Then some horrible things happen in the basement, and now JonBenét is dead. The person then, and also at this point, while JonBenét is knocked out, I'm assuming the person uses the back staircase, puts down the note, and then goes to the basement, assuming to do the horrible things they're going to do, because sound won't travel as well, given it'll be on the basement floor, and then realizes she's dead. And then at that point, they stage the scene. So they stage up JonBenét's body. They do all this stuff to make it look like something else that it wasn't, maybe trying to frame the parents. The person then exited out of any number of points. There was a lot of doors they could have unlocked from the inside, and then lockpicked whatever. So it's not that hard for them to escape. A lot of people, the most popular theory is that the intruder actually came through the window in the basement. There is literally no evidence to support this, just given the fact that there were spider webs on the window and they were completely untouched. There was no markings on, say, if there was dirt around the window, there was no indication that somebody had opened the window or done anything to get through it. There was no real glass to indicate somebody coming through it, given it was a broken window that John Ramsey confessed to doing earlier. There's no indication that the window had anything to do with this case. Now, there was a suitcase placed underneath the window, but I don't necessarily think that means anything. Maybe if the person was in the basement, they thought maybe they could put her body into the suitcase and then escape that way. But that doesn't make a lot of sense because also the window, it would have seemed very inconvenient trying to get JonBenét if the plan was to kidnap her. So a lot of it doesn't make sense if you think the window is how it was done. The most likely position, if it was an intruder, was through, just going through a door, going through a window that was unlocked, or they unlocked it themselves, whatever, and then leaving. So that is the intruder theory. I think it has massive flaws in it. There are massive things that don't make sense. I talked about the parents and the Ramsey family overall. I'm going to leave that out of this because, yes, they do a lot of suspicious things. They lie a good amount. They, as a whole, they paint themselves to look guilty, albeit, yes, they are innocent, but they do not help themselves in all of that. But I want to point out just massive flaws in the overall theory, not regarding the parents at all. The ransom note does not make sense if your initial plan was to kidnap her and ransom her, all that. It doesn't make any sense. It just feels like a red herring. If this was an intruder, they were, on one hand, smart enough to leave no real trace that they were there, but then also they were stupid enough to make a ransom note that literally makes no sense. The ransom note should have been a couple sentences at most, and it was literally like 3 pages. It makes no sense that an intruder wrote the note. It seems completely performative, theatrical almost. It's like referencing movies. It doesn't fit an intruder writing the note, especially given how much time was done. That's a whole nother thing. The intruder would have had to have used everything that was in the house, which is another baffling thing. If you're so prepared, everything in the house, why wouldn't you take things that you can use? I mean, again, it goes to maybe like trying to paint the parents as guilty if you're the intruder, but it's just weird to me. The second thing is the person was sloppy enough to leave DNA on JonBenét, but not on any other surface or show any sign of their break-in whatsoever. The only indication that there is legitimately an intruder is the DNA, but the DNA was only left on JonBenét, and it's never found anywhere else. Now, is that because of contamination of the scene? We will never know because the Ramseys called over 50 million different people, completely contaminated the scene. The police didn't do the best job in this case. All of that. But still, that gets to like my fourth main issue. On one hand, you have to believe the intruder is a mastermind, genius criminal because of how he got away with it. And also, I have been referencing this person as a he. That's based on the DNA. But you have to believe that this person is very smart, knows how to get away with it, knows how to have like a cover up all of his tracks, like for instance, Dexter. And then at the same time, you have to believe they're a complete and utter idiot. The ransom note, leaving DNA on JonBenét, it just makes no sense from any side of it the way you go. And so I end this video in a lot of ways just saying the intruder theory, there is a plausibility that it could have happened. But do the statistics back it up? And does the circumstantial evidence point to it? In my opinion, no. Because the other issue is that, for the most part, everybody that John and Patsy pointed to of being close to the family who they could have seen doing it were all cleared and all had alibis. If this was an intruder and it was somebody that knew them, I believe it would have had to have been somebody that knew John from his company. That would make sense on how much his bonus was. It would make sense in terms of if this was like a business person that didn't necessarily need the money, they didn't actually care about the ransom. It was more to, hurt John for whatever reason or send a message. And maybe they were messed up in the head and they thought JonBenét was desirable. It just makes me, I just don't like speaking that at all. But that's the only way I think this makes sense. It could be a stranger that, saw JonBenét in terms of her pageants and just stalked the family and just planned this for a while. I just don't see it. So let me know what you guys think about the intruder theory. I feel like for what I've seen mostly in my comments in my community is I would say the vast majority of people I've seen commenting are on that some formation or some collective of the Ramseys did this allegedly. I have seen a few people that don't believe that. And so if you're one of those people, I'd love to hear why you believe that the intruder theory, and there's a number of different variations. I went with the most plausible ones, but there are more of them. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. I'm really getting into the Madeleine McCann case, winding down the research process, and the research process takes, at least a month, given I've gone through 2 or 3 books at this point. I have about a 30 to 40 page script, which is way longer than the JonBenét case. And I'm really excited to get into that. I won't really get into the Madeleine McCann case for the channel, for you guys, probably until November. But I hope you guys enjoy, as we probably will hit either Burke, Patsy, or John in the next theory video. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.